So you are good whenever.
Thank you. Hi, good morning. My name is Patty Arcano. I'm a senior key account executive with Ivanti. We thank you so much for joining us today. It's so great to see friends and industry colleagues and customers in the audience. So thank you so much for taking the time. During this presentation, you're going to hear from several of us. We're going to review some use cases, plus give you a brief overview of who Ivanti is. I often say we are the best kept $2 billion secret inside the Beltway. Today, your presenters will not only be myself, but we have our SE manager, Farhan Saifudin. Our federal CTO, Bill Harrod, will be joining us, and also one of our principal sales engineers, Paul Don. Farhan, why don't we move on? So as I said, we are the best kept secret, $2 billion best kept secret. We are an American company. We are headquartered in South Jordan, Utah. We are a mix of several companies that have been brought together, and we are building our single solution dashboard of everything that helps you discover, manage, service, and secure everything on your network. So some of the companies that have come together are MobileIron, Pulse Secure, RiskSense, Sharewell, Shavlik, Encaptic, and others around the world. So what we're doing is we have an amazing leadership team from different Fortune 500 companies, and we are very cash rich with $1.5 billion in addition to our revenue. Why don't we move on, Farhan? So as I said, a lot of people don't realize how widely deployed we are in the US federal government, as well as other governments around the world. So here's the public sector or federal NASCAR slide in front of you. Different ways that we are being used in government today. I will share with you as Forrester and Gartner have us up in the upper right-hand magic quadrant for our solutions. We have connected and disconnected networks leveraging us for patch, asset management, service management, UEM, as well as secure communications from different parts of the Department of Defense, as well as the intelligence communities. Go ahead, Farhan. One thing that we are so proud of are our different certifications. We all know how incredibly important that is, from FIPS 140-2 to our commercial solutions for classified certification, our DISA-STIGs, our common criteria, but also, being on that NSA and DOTA approved products list. Today, our solutions are in process of becoming FedRAMP High modified, certified, But as I said, we have solutions to be deployed on-prem and in the cloud. We are today with partners deployed in IL5, and we look forward to owning those certifications for our products as well on our own. Farhan, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think you covered it pretty well. Thank you, Patty.
So is Bill with us?
I am, Patty, thanks.
Great. So Bill, if I can ask you to take over from here, that would be great.
Terrific. Thanks very much, and appreciate it. Thank you all for joining, and happy to take questions as we go through this morning. One of the things that we wanted to talk about is as we talk about zero trust, the key really is protecting data and applications wherever they reside. Years ago, data and applications all resided within a fixed physical boundary, a building, a data center. Many years ago, when I first started as an MVS systems operator, all of my users were at the end of a coax cable or a VTAM connection, and I knew every one of them and where everybody was. Today, that's all changed, right? Our data, our applications, our resources reside virtually everywhere. We've moved things to the cloud. DoD and much of federal government has embraced taking Active Directory into the cloud. Office 365 has become prevalent and to some extent ubiquitous, but many applications and data now reside in the cloud. The concern there is how do we then secure those applications, that data that now resides outside of those physical boundaries. Farhan, let's go to the next slide. And it really is the everywhere workplace. You know, they say that there was a McKinsey study that said the COVID pandemic accelerated IT modernization by 7 years. And it certainly is true. Everybody, almost overnight, federal government went to nearly 90% or more remote and telework. We have more devices. People are using their personal devices, but also devices that are iOS devices, mobile devices, platforms, mobile tablets. So we have more devices, many more platforms that we have to protect, and apps. So it's not just applications that are website applications or applications running within a data center, whether the data center be a physical data center or the cloud, but apps that are downloaded from the Apple Store or the Play Store. And more networks. People are coming in from wherever they are. So they're coming across public networks and networks that are unsecured, and then more services. Federal government is providing many more electronic and digital services to the public, and relying on more services from vendors. So the everywhere workplace really goes from everything from IoT devices at the endpoints, traditional endpoint compute devices, servers, but also mobile platforms and modern devices as well. Let's go on, Farhan. So the push to zero trust really is how do we eliminate that what has traditionally been inherited trust. There is no more a model of being able to authenticate once and then leverage resources inside what we typically think of as a traditional network or enterprise perimeter. So how do we move to no inherited trust, continuous authentication, continuous authorization based on who the user is, their behavioral biometrics, where they're coming from, the state of the device that they're coming from, the network that they're coming from, and then put into place conditional controls that validate who they are, that they have the authorized access, and then provide that conditional access to be able to leverage access to data and resources from whatever the device may be across the entire enterprise of solutions and applications to be able to get to data and resources that they need to be able to do their job and to fulfill the mission. So with that, Farhan, I'm going to turn it back over to you to dive into the technical side of it and do the demo.
Absolutely. Thank you, Bill and Patty. I'm going to double click a little bit on what Bill had mentioned and talk about Ivanti's zero trust perspective. As Bill stated, right, it's assumed security threats are already in your enterprise. And enterprise for us is your traditional on-prem network, but also your cloud and your modern mobile endpoints that are connecting from everywhere. And there's no inherited trust, and we continuously verify that those devices, those users, those apps should be authorized. How do we do that? So one, we can validate the device itself, and that means a few things to Ivanti. We have, through our acquisitions, various endpoint management technologies. So we can do modern mobile device management, lock down endpoints into a known good state, right? Configure them with the enterprise profiles the enterprise applications, continuously patch those endpoints, and ensure that those endpoints are tied to specific users if that scenario is part of your use case. So we continuously validate that device. Then we're able to establish user context, and we do that a few ways. On modern mobile endpoints, we have solutions where we're able to derive credentials from traditional CAC and PIV smart cards and put that identity on a modern mobile endpoint. That identity can be used in conjunction with a policy enforcement point, either ours or a partner's, where we can provide conditional access attributes to establish authorization. So checking app authorization is the next piece. We continuously verify that the applications themselves that are connecting to your enterprise services, whether in the cloud or on premise, that those applications are approved and that they are locked down in a manner that is compliant with your security policies. And that the end users are also using the right apps. In modern mobile endpoints, we have managed apps and unmanaged apps. You have users attempting to log into services from any device, and we want to make sure that those apps themselves are secured. So if you wanted to create conditional access rules to block certain applications that have known vulnerabilities on them, those are some of the features of checking app authorization. We also continuously verify the networks that the endpoints connect to, and we do that a few ways. On modern mobile endpoints, we can check literally the networks that they connect to, both carrier and Wi-Fi, make sure there's no rogue access points in the middle, and also ensure, if needed, that there's a per app VPN or a TLS gateway that your communication is going through. That's either done through configuration, but also through various checks with our agents running on those endpoints. And then finally, we detect and remediate threats. So we have integrated endpoint protection and threat defense capabilities. These solutions detect things like device, network, application, and phishing level vulnerabilities and threats. When those things are detected, we can take actions on the device to proactively block them from accessing enterprise data or removing enterprise applications. And all of this is done in an ongoing compliance enforcement basis with a centralized dashboard that gives your security team the access they need and the visibility they need to be able to see these automated actions take place. So a little bit about the Ivanti portfolio. We're able to, as Patty mentioned, discover, manage, secure, and service any modern endpoint, as well as traditional endpoints. So the discovery side of things, we have active and passive discovery agents that can go out on your network and your extended network and discover any of your endpoints, anything with a network heartbeat. If you're using our agent model, we get a little bit more control. You can start to patch those machines, detect the OS versions, detect the applications that are deployed on those endpoints, and configure that endpoint into a known good state. And that's done continuously. Then in the managed side, we have various endpoint management technologies. We covered the full gambit from Windows, Mac, Linux, as well as mobile modern endpoints, iOS and Android, virtual machines, and IoT devices. So we can do everything from the provisioning of those endpoints to distributing software through a consolidated enterprise app store, enforcing application allowed list and disallowed list, provide IT help desk resources for remote control and troubleshooting, and also provide the data analytics and telemetry on those devices that can ultimately be used for conditional access. Things like application version information, OS version information, the identities that are tied to those endpoints, how long an end user has been using an endpoint, their active sessions. All of that information and telemetry can be used through integrations and through our own solutions for conditional access. From a workspace perspective, we're able to configure virtual machines as well, and give you a centralized place to manage those. to view ports, protocols, and access and who has access to what. Certain tier 3 administrators may need access versus your tier 2. If they need to just go in and reboot virtual machines, we have ways for them to manage that. And then from the modern mobility side of things, we have a modern endpoint management, unified endpoint manager, a network access and conditional access solution, and a modern mobile threat defense solution that can detect device, network, application, phishing level attacks. And we'll talk a little bit about that and how that plays into zero trust through various frameworks. And then from the security side of things, we are able to continuously patch any endpoint. A lot of that technology came from the Landesk technologies that formed Ivanti. So we can cover traditional Windows and Linux endpoints, and then the modern endpoints as well, either through our integrated APIs or through our own agent patching. And then the patch intelligence is something that we've added recently through an acquisition of RiskSense. We are able to detect the various vulnerabilities on your endpoints and then categorize them in actual weaponized threats, right? So instead of you just going off CVSS or CVE risk scoring, we tell you which vulnerabilities are truly weaponized so that you can focus on those patches first and then continuously patch throughout. From a secure access side of things, we have a cloud access security broker, traditional VPNs, but what we're going to show you today is our new zero trust network architecture that our friend Paul will go through. And then from a service management side of things, we have an integrated CMDB. We can view all of your assets through a single console. And then those assets can be centrally managed through our service desk and asset management technologies. And then from an identity side of things, we have a solution to derived credentials on modern endpoints, but also to manage the life cycle of AD, user account creation, and policy enforcement for those various users and groups and OU structures within Active Directory, and also manage password resets for the agencies that are still stuck on passwords. One of our goals is to eliminate passwords. We're going to talk about how we do that as well. All of this is coming together in a solution called Ivanti Neurons. This is an integrated SaaS-based solution that is able to pull in information from the various products that we have and partner products to give you a holistic view of your endpoints, the security of your endpoints, and ultimately automate the actions that you take on those endpoints for patching, device health, and servicing. So we'll continue down this path, and I'll talk a little bit about how we mapped to the zero trust capability model for those various products. So just a few off in the data column here. So we can enforce data loss prevention. From a modern mobile endpoint, we have containerization technologies and can prevent things like cut, copy, and paste or managed open-in of various documents on iOS and Android. Then we can also prevent things like screenshots and any of the features of a Windows operating system through our endpoint manager that can essentially block end users from doing things that they shouldn't. And that's either through our endpoint management agent deployment or traditional GPO. We have an editor built into our endpoint manager. We can also enforce data encryption. We can do that a few ways. We have data at rest encryption through containerization, but also leverage native APIs to enforce some of the native operating system level encryption as well. From the device and endpoint column perspective, we can give you a single pane of glass to manage your endpoints, whether it's modern endpoints or traditional endpoints. and that'll give you a single inventory list of all the endpoints in your network. Our agents will continuously ping the network to find new devices, so it's not simply connected to Active Directory and anything that's AD joined will find. We're looking for anything with a network heartbeat that's out there, so that we're ultimately giving you visibility into all of the devices and assets that are out there on your network. We're able to provide, from the network side of things, a policy enforcement point for your endpoints connecting to various enterprise assets. And we continuously use the device attributes for conditional access, whether it be app trust or end user authentication or authorization. We're essentially intercepting that traffic so that we can make those risk-based decisions on if we should allow endpoints to connect to those back-end resources. And there are a few ways we do that. We'll talk a little bit about that when we go through the Zero Trust Network Architecture demo. And the application workload perspective, we have various technologies that can do application deployments specifically for modern mobile applications. We can manage the application publishing lifecycle. So in iOS and Android, in the iOS and Android world, there is a process to sign applications and publish them to the public app stores. We have a capability that will track the application binaries and then allow stakeholders to approve that application as it gets security vetted and automatically publish it in a continuous fashion. Specifically, when it comes to the security aspect, if there are vulnerabilities in that application, through our integration with our security scanning technology, we can point that out to the developer can fix that app, and then instead of having to wait for the approvals to manually publish that app and go and sign it, we do that in automated fashion continuously, so it's a faster time to release of that application. We also have a capability to track software licensing and endpoint licensing from a supply chain perspective. From the user perspective, we have a solution to provide multi-factor authentication in what we call a zero sign-on capability. So instead of you using passwords and PKI alone for authentication, you can use your modern mobile endpoints managed by MobileIron and protected by our threat defense capability to continuously authenticate and be authorized to various cloud and on-prem sessions with your backend applications. From a visibility perspective, we can, again, discover any endpoint with a heartbeat on your network, and that information is captured, and we can take actions and patch those machines. And then we have APIs that allow automation and orchestration for a lot of the things that we talked about as well. A lot of the orchestration and automation is done through our Neurons platform, and we're going to show you some of that. Any questions so far? All right. I'm going to talk a little bit about our risk-based patch management technologies. As I discussed, we acquired a company called RiskSense. The reason why risk-based patch management isn't needed, one, scanners produce lots of data, right? And they'll tell you, how many or what vulnerabilities are out there on your endpoints if it knows about the endpoints. But they don't actually do the patching, and they don't do the categorization other than traditional CVSS scoring. And CVSS scoring does not account for active threats, right? We want to know what's actually weaponized. So using our solution with Patch Intelligence, we can tell you what vulnerabilities are truly weaponized and what are the vulnerabilities that are trending, right? And instead of just going off criticality, where oftentimes if you do try to patch everything that's like medium level criticality and above, it's an almost impossible task. So we'll give you a solution to go after the threats that are truly weaponized and then automatically patch them through our endpoint management technologies. There's also an urgent need to address the exposure from the risk. So time to patch is critical. And that needs to be done continuously. So especially applying the zero trust framework to this, it's one, patching all the endpoints in your extended network, but also patching the solutions that are providing the zero trust network framework. The many different gateways and CASBs that have gateways on premise. Those types of technologies also need to be patched, and those are some of the things that we can do. So what we can do through our risk-based intelligence, patch intelligence, is focus on the vulnerabilities that truly matter, right? So if we look at this example here, where there's a total findings of 13.4 million vulnerabilities in this environment, we can categorize those vulnerabilities and determine which ones are truly weaponized. And then from there, figure out, okay, these 709,000 are the ones that are actually vulnerable to remote code execution. And then from there, we can find which ones are actually trending so that you can start there. Those are going to be your vulnerabilities most likely to be exploited. So that we give you the intelligence into your patch environment and then give you the ability to go out and automatically patch it. So how do we get that information? We're able to ingest various scanning technology capabilities into the platform and application and code scanner technologies. Additionally, we're able to grab the asset information from the various asset management technologies that are out there and determine what endpoints you have out there, including our own Ivanti discovery capability and asset management technology. So when we discover those endpoints and and the vulnerabilities that have been detected by the scanners, we're able to contextualize those threats and apply our vulnerability risk rating to it, which is the funnel capability, so that you can go and patch the immediate threats to your environment without having you lose time and resources trying to patch everything. So patch the ones that are critical from a vulnerability risk rating perspective first. And we give you the ability to organize this information and create playbooks for that automated patch workflow as well, and provide the ability through integrations with our incident management technologies to tell you that these machines have been patched, they're going to be down during this time. All of that would be automated. Additionally, there's an integration with SIM and SOAR technologies to give you a common dashboard on which machines have been patched through your various organizations. Is there any questions in here?
So Farhan, there is a question that came up. And is all of this information, so all of the information that we're ingesting, is this information gathered, stored, and controlled at locations internal to CONUS, specifically for those organizations that need to meet the government requirements?
Yes. The short answer is yes. There's also the ability to take that information and store it offline for some of our customers that run in disconnected environments.
Right. So I think there's two things there that are critical to touch on. One is we have the ability to run this in a number of different ways, right? So in a completely disconnected network, if that's what's required, in an on-prem network, if that's what's required, and from a cloud-based solution, but it is a FedRAMP cloud. And a U.S. Can be a U.S. government cloud. So there are a number of different deployment scenarios that we have.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. And I'll just touch a little bit further on those disconnected use cases. There is obviously we would have to get the patch intelligent information from something, but there's a process where we can gather that information on a connected machine and sneaker net it to a machine that's in the disconnected environment, and then continuously, it's basically one file, right? Instead of you having to go out and gather the patch information from various sources, whether it be Microsoft or all the third-party apps that are out there that may be in that environment, we'll give you one consolidated feed. So it's one, ultimately one file that you bring over to your disconnected environment.
And a couple other questions, Farhan, just before we go on. So back on the zero trust slide, if you can just jump back to that for a second.
Sure.
Ross asked a good question, and my apologies for not making this clearer as we went into this. The things that are highlighted here in red or that have a red background, those are all areas of the zero trust capabilities where Ivanti can support the requirements that underlie these. So we have solutions. We may not be the only player required to do some of this or to do it completely, but we have ways of helping solution all of the things that are highlighted here in red. And then there was one other question. One of the key capabilities of zero trust firms is the capability to integrate with existing cybersecurity infrastructure. How does Ivanti do this? And again, I think this is a good place to address that, and that is through the API standards. So one of the things that I often talk about is that the President Biden's executive order, the DHS binding operational directive, and the OPM memos that have come out are all talking about zero trust requirements, adapting a zero trust architecture, and then also the requirements around vulnerability management and prioritizing and patching. Many of those tend to look at an end-to-end solution. So something that has that requires a rip and replace from an organization. And what we're suggesting is that that's not necessarily requirement, nor is it effective for many agencies, particularly since so many of these are unfunded mandates. So what we're suggesting is that Ivanti has ways of being able to do the gap analysis and help fill those gaps as required, so that there are ways to be able to do that. So I'm going to go back on mute because I've got a lot of background noise. I don't know whether it's me.
Thank you, Bill.
It was me.
It seems to be gone now. Looks like we have a couple more questions in the chat. Trying to pull that up. Okay.
So Farhan, why don't you continue, and Bill and I will handle the questions in the chat, okay?
That sounds good. It looks like we got them. All right. So I'm going to dive into a demo of the Ivanti neurons for patch intelligence and patch management. Again, as Bill stated, this is offered as both a cloud and on-prem product. So what I'm going to show you is the cloud product, but just keep that in mind. All right, just validating you can still see my screen and you're seeing the neurons console.
Yep.
All right, thank you. So this is the Ivanti neurons console. Obviously, there's a lot more capabilities outside of patch management and intelligence. I'm going to touch on a few. When you first log in, you'll see a dashboard of all the endpoints that are managed and some of the information that essentially whoever's logging into this console would care about. So if you have a security team logging into the console versus a help desk team, they might see different things. But this is a single pane of glass for both of those teams. They are able to see things like free disk space, installed memory, but we can come in here and add additional widgets that would be, around your specific patch requirements. So OS versioning, application versioning, SLAs that we've met for the patches. All of that can be done here and exported on an ongoing basis for reporting as well. when a device is discovered through our discovery technology, either through agents or agentless, it'll show up here in the devices tab, and we'll be able to get a lot of the telemetry about the device, but also take some of the actions and patches that are required for that device. So we'll continuously scan that device for some of the information that you see here. And then that information is fed to our patch intelligence technology to ultimately tell us, what vulnerabilities are present on that device and how and what patches we need to publish. Then from this console as well, we can go in and automatically patch any of the applications that are on that device or the operating system itself. Again, this is more for visibility. What we would do is set this in an automated fashion and continuously patch the vulnerabilities, prioritizing the vulnerability risk rating patches that are configured for your environment that are higher on that criticality. We can still leverage the CVE scoring, but the preference would be the VRR first. And then from there, I'm going to show you the patch intelligence capability. So this is the patch intelligence dashboard. In the top left corner, you'll see the SLAs of your endpoints for the patches that are remaining and which ones are in compliance. The various patch types, if it's security critical, important, or unassigned. Some of the known vulnerabilities that are out there, if they're vulnerable or if they're actually exploited, and we know about it. That is where the agent will continuously check. The patch summary names here, these are the various applications and operating systems that are on the endpoints in this environment. From this console, we can schedule patches based on patch groups. So if you have like specific, groups within your organization, either based off of business unit or, various grouping mechanisms, you can schedule your patches based on that. So say you have shift workers and you need to patch their machines when they are not in the office, you can do that. And then the reliability here will tell you the reliability of the risk vulnerability rating, and we tie that back to the CVE. There may be many CVEs for a specific patch, and we'll tell you based on our analysis of those CVEs if the patch, or I'm sorry, if the vulnerability is weaponized and if it's remote code executable, right? And then that will either change our scale of the VRR, so you can focus on those ones that are truly exploitable before you try to patch everything. Again, this would be in an automated fashion, so you don't need to come into this console. This is more for visibility into the machines and their various risk and active vulnerabilities. We can also set the patch schedules, right? So the automated patch function for your patch groups would be done through this configuration. You can see here that we can patch based on criticality of the VRR, and then patch by group as well. We can also force the reboot that many of the patches need, and you can schedule that for off hours as needed. Any questions so far?
So Farhan, I think one of the interesting things is that I recently had an email from a very large multinational financial organization that was talking about how they have leveraged the prioritized risk-based vulnerability management and patching to improve their organization, saving them huge amounts of money, and being able to not only to address these vulnerabilities in a prioritized way, being able to bring down the number of priority vulnerabilities that they were working on to something manageable, but also to be able to help automate and kick off the playbooks, as you had mentioned, right? So being able to tag and label assets throughout their enterprise, and then being able to see vulnerabilities by device and also devices by vulnerability in order to validate that they are meeting the requirements that they've got, particularly around those exploitable weaponized vulnerabilities.
Absolutely, that funnel is critical, right? Attempting to patch everything is ultimately the goal, but it takes a lot of time and resources. So starting with the critical vulnerabilities first is key. I'm going to switch back to the presentation here and jump into our mobile-centric zero trust approach here, and then turn it over to Paul. So I want to talk a little bit about the mobile-centric zero trust approach. Through the acquisition, we acquired MobileIron. MobileIron has a unified endpoint management technology that can manage iOS and Android, as well as modern Windows 10 and 11 and Mac OS. So the UEM is the policy engine. That's how we provision secure workspaces. And it could be a workspace that is either on government furnished equipment where we're controlling the whole device. So workspace from that sense, but also from a bring your own approved device perspective, we can use technologies such as containerization, leveraging some of the iOS and Android native APIs to separate enterprise managed apps from personal apps, and as stated before, enforce the data loss prevention. From that same console, you can distribute all of your enterprise applications and your enterprise configurations, such as per app VPN and the Sentry Gateway technology, which is essentially our access control pane for your on-prem resources. Again, it can be deployed as a per app VPN with split tunneling or as an inline TLS gateway. The continuous zero trust framework that we've identified with UEM and Sentry is that we're continuously looking for any changes on this modern mobile endpoint, right? And if security policies have been violated, we can cut off connectivity to those backend enterprise resources, as there is an integration between UEM and Sentry to do that. In a similar fashion, we can do that for your enterprise cloud services, where our MobileIron Access zero sign-on solution can authenticate and authorize an end user through an integration with the various identity providers that are out there. But then we add device and application trust to that equation. So instead of you authorizing anyone that is authenticated to the identity provider, we're looking at device and application trust continuously. And if that device or that user or that application falls out of compliance with that policy, we can cut off that connectivity to those enterprise cloud services as well until they remediate. And the threat defense agent is actively looking for those device, network, application, and phishing level attacks on that device, and ultimately will take those remediation actions in an automated fashion to block connectivity to your enterprise and cloud resources. I have a few quick demos on some of these capabilities. So this is our MobileIron threat defense capability. It is integrated into our MDM agent that is active on iOS and Android devices. And again, we're looking for active device threats. So OS vulnerabilities, if the device has not been updated and there are critical vulnerabilities in that operating system version, we can block the connectivity to the enterprise services such as email until the end user goes and updates their devices, or we push an update from the MDM. In iOS and Android, we only have so much control in forcing the update, but we can alert the end user or kick it off in the background, but the end user will still have to accept it. This is a quick demo of a phishing attack on a modern iOS device. So an end user gets a phishing link sent to them in an SMS within iMessage. And what we'll do is just block them from being able to access that site and alert them that hey, this link is risky. You're not going to be able to continue to that site. That gets categorized in our console so that the security teams can also view that information and know that that took place on that device. We can also block unmanaged logins from logins from unmanaged modern mobile endpoints through our MobileIron Access Zero Sign-On capability. So as the end user attempts to log in from their personal device, they'll get redirected to our MobileIron splash page saying, "Hey, you need to enroll in the in our Unified Endpoint Manager in order to access enterprise accounts for such as Office 365 email." In doing that, we can also eliminate passwords. So using our Access Zero Sign-On technology, we leverage a combination of PKI and identity provider integration to ultimately authenticate and authorize end users that have managed their mobile devices and push the configuration seamlessly to the end user so they don't have to enter usernames and passwords, but instead use our continuous authentication mechanism to authenticate them. And that leverages features such as biometrics like Face ID to ultimately unlock the session to an application like Salesforce. So here you're going to see an end user launch Salesforce for the first time. They've never had to enter their username or password, but because the device is already managed and it has a managed profile and the traffic is going through MobileIron Access, we're able to check that the device is managed, the app is trusted, and the user has the right authorization to get access to those enterprise apps.
And Farhan, this might be a good point just to inject that one of the things that was in the note. We gather about 40 attributes on the device that become part of the conditional access validation. So behavioral biometrics, the compliance of the device, the network that they're coming from, as Farhan said, validation of the operating system, validation that they're not on an unauthorized or risky network, and validation that there is no malware or malicious code on the device, all before any access decisions are made. And if it's out of compliance for any reason, or if the identity of the device and the identity of the user are not able to be validated jointly, so we recognize the user and their device, then additional steps are taken around the authorization and authentication.
Yeah, great point, Bill. Thank you. I'm going to jump ahead because I know we're running low on time here. I did want to mention some of our derived credential integration that is part of those attributes that Bill is talking about. We can derive those credentials on modern mobile endpoints, iOS and Android, but that derived credential itself could be used as an attribute for those risk-based decisions as well. We can tell you, when it was derived and where it is stored, whether it's in native keychain or within our container. So that derived credential can ultimately be used for authentication and signing and encryption within managed email apps as well. I'm going to skip ahead and allow Paul to go into our Ivanti neurons for ZTA. Paul, let me hand the ball over to you.
Great, thank you. Maybe you could just build on this slide. Thank you. So just to go over a few things that we were seeing in the market. We are seeing two trends happening within our customer base at the same time. Many of our customers that had traditionally used really perimeter security models were moving to zero trust architectures. And then at the same time, we are seeing those same customers moving from having really data center centric network architectures to moving their data outside of that data center to, of course, SaaS applications like Office 365, Box, things like that, as well as public clouds like AWS and Azure. And these presented a few challenges that they needed to address. Of course, the first thing is that they needed to really eliminate that inside-outside distinction, both for their end users, where they had that protected area inside that they thought was safe, which of course we all know now was never really safe, but then also for their data as well. They can no longer say the data inside of our data center is protected and the data outside in our SaaS applications, well, that's outside of our control. And with this, they had to recognize a few issues with the way they had been securing their data in the past. The first is what we call policy islands, where when users are connecting in from remotely, they would be secured and managed through a VPN concentrator, and that was applying policy to those connections. When those users stepped into the office, there'd be a separate NAC that was authenticating them and applying policy. And then when they're accessing data that was outside of that data center and SaaS applications, there was a separate identity and access manager that was securing those applications. What we saw was these three pieces were applying different policies to the users as they were accessing data. So a user's level of access would change based on where they were or where the data they were accessing was. And so NZTA was really meant to address these issues, where it would provide a single policy engine that would manage access no matter where the user was or where that data that they were accessing is. Farhan, could you go to the next slide? Thank you. And so NZTA is really based around this multi-cloud approach to providing access. And what it does is it uses the software-defined perimeter architecture that was created by the Cloud Alliance to separate out the control plane from the data plane. And by that, I mean, if you think of your traditional VPN appliances, they do actually a variety of functions. They first have to authenticate that user, going out to your identity manager for that strong authentication. Next, they need to examine that device, what we call host check, and look at the security posture, determine if that meets the corporate security policies and if it should be allowed in. Then from there, it takes that information, it knows about the user and the device they're coming in on, and assigns them a set of access rights so that that user only has access to the resources they should rather than the entire network. And then the final piece that it does is actually build that secure tunnel, whether it's an IPsec or SSL tunnel, and do that data transport. And what NZTA does is really separate out those two functions. The first set of functions of authenticating the user, determining the security posture of their device, authorizing them and providing them with a set of resources they're allowed to access is done within the controller, which is a SaaS service. And then the actual data transport is done with gateways on your premise. This means that your data, of course, never goes through the NZTA controller or our network. It's all contained on your devices and going back directly to your network. So you maintain data sovereignty the entire time. Additionally, because the gateways are used to access data, whether the user is on-premise or remote, the user always has a consistent experience and a consistent set of access rights. So they are authenticated once and provided access across all your assets, whether they're in your data center or in a cloud or SaaS resource. And then finally, because that device, no matter where it is always connected to the controller, we're doing that background analysis of the device. We're making sure that whether that user is accessing resources in your network or just doing work locally, we're still checking that device through a process of CARTA or continuous checking of the security posture of that device. So you get an understanding of where that user is, what they're doing, what they're accessing in a really fine-grained way. And we're able to display that to you in a single console and give you that analytics across all of your utilization. So Farhan, maybe you could pass the ball to me and I'll go through a demo.
Go for it, Paul. You should have the con.
Great, thank you. Could I just get confirmation that you are seeing my screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, great. So I always like to use myself and Pulse as an example. Pulse, much like Ivanti, was a company that was built out of many acquisitions, and we have sites across the world. And so we have, of course, VPN appliances that we used across the world in San Jose, in our offices in Cambridge for our VADC acquisition, our Bangalore offices for engineering. And these gave us access to different resources based on where they were. And so I'd, of course, have connections to all of them. When we moved to ZTA, we of course moved to that central management model where all of my access is managed from a single console, and I'm able to connect to all of these locations through one single connection. So right now I have my ZTA connection. It is always connected to that controller, but it is saying it's idle because I'm not connected to any resource. What happens when I want to access a resource is either I open up the client that will utilize that resource, or if it's a web application, I can click on the ZTA button and bring up just a image of all the applications I have access to. I click on the resource I want or go to it. And what happens is this client in the background spins up a tunnel to that location and provides me access. I'm of course unaware of all of this happening as a general user. And I'm just given access to that resource. And of course, this is same whether I'm in one of our offices or at my home at Starbucks. Of course, as this is happening, the Pulse client is continually checking the security posture of my device so that if I ever go out of compliance, if say anything ever happens to my device, my antivirus is shut off, it will automatically shut down my access until I can remediate that. And you know that I am not a threat to the network. Now I'm just going to quickly move over to our management console and just show you how this is configured. So you have one management console for the entire deployment across the world. And really this is looking at 4 key things. First, the users. What users are coming into your organization. And as I mentioned earlier, to authenticate users, we link in to your existing MFA environment and your existing identity and access manager. So we would use things like Azure AD, Okta, Ping, the major SAML identity providers. Next, once we know who that user is, we look at their device and the rules around their device. What are the security posture do you want to allow access into your organization? And that may be things like, is it a corporate owned or GFE piece of equipment? Is the user located in the continental United States? Is that device, maybe you have some lower security assets where it doesn't need to be GFE equipment. The user can use any device they want as long as it has antivirus. And these rules get set on an application by application basis. Next, the applications, which are the resources that that user has access to. And that can be a website, it can be an entire subnet, an entire domain, or even things like this is me providing access to a terminal server through the client. You define what those applications are and what level of access each user and group of users should have access to. And these are always updated over the air. So when you add a new application to that user or user group, that configuration gets pushed down to the client. It's also updated on your gateways. And in a few minutes, that user then has access to the new application. And then finally, the gateways. And this is how that user has access to those resources. You can deploy as many gateways as you want. as you need more capacity, you just would add a new gateway to a location. So it becomes really easy to plan your future needs and expand as those needs increase. And all of these are built into our secure access policies, where we say, where we have the applications the user can access, how they get to that application, which of your users have access to it, and then what devices are allowed to go through. Once you set up the access to all of your users, we provide dashboards that allow you to see who is accessing those data, what gateways they're accessing it through, what applications, both across your entire environment. So you can see which applications are being used a lot versus maybe an application that's never used, to determine what value you're getting out of those applications. You can quickly see your gateways and the status. So if there's any issues, you can quickly remediate them and make sure that they don't cause problems for your end users. And then, of course, you can see things like anomalies within your network. For example, if a user comes in from both London and New York at the same time, we would flag that as an anomaly because, of course, that user can't be in two places at once. We're tracking those users over time. So we'd also say things like, if a user is always connecting from Virginia, and then after a month of only connecting from Virginia, suddenly they're connecting from Spain, that would also be anomalous activity for that user. Great, Farhan. Now I'll hand it back over to you.
Thank you, Paul. Let me go and share my screen again.
Just a quick note, we have about 10 minutes left for the presentation.
Okay, great. Thank you.
No worries.
Should be wrapping up here. There's a few additional things I wanted to touch on. So we have many different partner integrations through the Ivanti solutions. We have network access control integration, identity integration with the various identity providers. Again, we feed risk-based information to them, and we take information from them for authorization. From a SIM and SOAR perspective, we have integrations with Splunk and Tenable. A VPN perspective, we obviously have our own through the Pulse Secure acquisition, but have many other integrations with traditional VPNs and gateways, where again, we can either feed device and application trust information or take from them authorization information. The communication side of things, we have integrations with a capability called app config. And really for any application, configuring it remotely through our single pane of glass UEM solution, so that one, end users don't have to fiddle around with things like entering server addresses and uploading certificates and adding different features into the apps, but also ensuring the security of those apps, leveraging some of the application control configurations to lock down that app. And then from a cloud services perspective, we have solutions that are SaaS, but also are hosted in various cloud offerings. And we can provide conditional access, as you've seen, to many of those different cloud services through the integrations with the IDP and ZTNA and Access.
And Farhan, a couple of partners that are not shown on that slide that are really important is partners around credentialing, right? So for the derived credential for PIV and CAC, for FIDO2, and then also partners, particularly Provoro and partners that allow us to be able to meet the DoD and NNSA directives around the use of mobile devices in classified spaces. So we have a large list of integrations and partnerships to be able to meet use cases and specific requirements that agencies have brought to us.
Thank you, Bill. So in summary, here's Ivanti's security offerings. This is all offered through the single pane of glass with Neurons as the unified endpoint management technology. from a user perspective, we can enable passwordless authentication, enforce security controls, enable anti-phishing for modern mobile endpoints. From an access perspective, you saw the Zero Trust network access demo. We have traditional VPNs and gateways that, again, use our device and application attributes for continuous authorization. And then from a device perspective, continuously patching and using vulnerability risk rating to funnel the critical patches first, not just based off of criticality with the CVSS scoring, but using things like trending information and the weaponization of the vulnerabilities. And then, of course, we can manage those endpoints if they are iOS, Android, Windows, Mac, Linux, or IoT. From an application perspective, we are able to create application allowed and disallowed list, create segmentation around application access, and enforce data loss prevention, and then give you a single pane of glass where you're able to discover all of your endpoints and show all of this information through neurons. That's all I had today. If there's any questions for the team, please let us know. There is a QR code link here to our Ivanti Patch Tuesday webinar series. For anyone that is continuously patching endpoints and endpoint security is critical, I highly recommend you join this webinar series. It goes on every Patch Tuesday.
Thanks, Farhan. Great job, everybody. I really appreciate it. I see some great questions still in the chat and asking more for information. We're going to provide Haley this presentation in PDF form for everyone on the call. And, please feel free to reach out to us. We would love to continue the conversation with you and share more about Ivanti. Over to you, Haley.
Hey, Patty,
Yeah.
can you also upload it to the Huddle? Would you mind uploading the presentation to Huddle as well?
Yeah, no problem, Jerry.
And
My
people
pleasure.
can grab it there. I appreciate
sure.
that. Thanks.
Awesome. Great. I'm gonna stop recording.